Well, most of us these days get from place to place in our car. There's not a lot of other options here in Southwest Louisiana, but that wasn't always the case. Local historian Adley Cormier is going to tell us about the old method for getting around town. And it's kind of hard to believe that back in the day, things were a little bit different, right, Adley?
Things were a little bit different. Of course, the history of our end of Louisiana, it sort of bridges from the the age of sail all the way through to modern times when you can zip around in cars and motorcycles and so forth. But for a large part of the history of Lake Charles, you got to Lake Charles by train, and you traveled around the city of Lake Charles by streetcar. If you didn't have your own, if you didn't have your own mule or horse, traveling to Lake Charles was a real challenge. There were a few chartered vessels that would come to Lake Charles, but actually very few. There were sailing vessels that came from Galveston early on, and the Gosses operated a steamboat for a while. But it was really unusual to use a vessel to come to Lake Charles. You came to Lake Charles by train. In the heyday of rail, there were
And where,
three train
yeah, where were
stations in
those?
Lake Charles.
Where was the train set up? Because I know that we still have a train depot that's kind of in downtown Lake Charles.
Yeah, we still do. We actually still have the Amtrak station, which is just west of where the original stations were. Because of the unique geography of Lake Charles, the east-west train, the one that came from New Orleans, the one that went to Houston, it started out as the Louisiana and Western, it became Southern Pacific. And the first train stations were on that line. And that line has been through Lake Charles since the very, very beginning, since the latter 1860s. The first train station in Lake Charles was a two-story wooden structure, but it marked because trains were essentially the cutting edge at this point. And the major train station, the Southern Pacific train station, was on Railroad Avenue for 100 years. But there were also other train stations on Ryan Street, and Clarence was Missouri Pacific, which was the train you had to use if you went up to Alexandria or if you wanted to go to Natchez. And then on Ryan Street near Price, in the day it was called Lawrence Street, but today it's called Price, there was the Kansas City Southern Terminal. And essentially in Lake Charles, this was the end of the line for Kansas City Southern. There was a spur line that connected us to DeQuincy, and that was the connector for if you wanted to go to Shreveport, for example, you would use Kansas City Southern because the line went up that way. So the train stations in Lake Charles dealt with different parts of the country, dealt with different railroads, and went in all sorts of different directions. And connecting those railroad stations was the streetcars. Interestingly enough, Lake Charles had a very early streetcar system operated by the Watkins Rail, which ran down Broad Street, connecting the lakefront to the train warehouses of First and Second Avenue. And there, the line went up First Avenue up into the sawmills, which were on the river. So that what was called the dummy line, and this is interesting, the dummy line, how did that come around? That was run by Watkins Rail, and it ran at the turn of the century. It brought workers to the sawmills. It brought students to the new Lake Charles High School, which was on Boulevard. It was interesting. But the longer running railroad station, streetcar system, was the one operated by Gulf States Utilities. And in its heyday, Mary, this is the really amazing thing. In its heyday, it ran 7 days a week and 24 hours a day in order to get people to work, kids to school, people to church. It was even running when the Great Fire happened. It brought firefighters to the fire. So it's a kind of an interesting development. Again, in the heyday, there were 5 lines of the Gulf States Utilities operated train line. It ran from as north as Cessford Street in what is now North Lake Charles, all the way down to Gulf Street, which is just south of where T.S. Cooley School is. It ran from Lake Street all the way to Second Avenue and sort of crisscrossed. So Kirkman Street had a streetcar, Kirby, Hodges, Michael DeBakey Drive, which was the South Ryan streetcar line, famously ended at Bar Pier it was a really remarkable thing, and it ran for a limited period of time. It all went down in 1927, and even in that, there's a kind of an interesting story. It went down because of lost ridership, but also because its major stockholder and champion, a fellow by the name of J. Landry, suddenly died. And when he died, his widow sold the stock that she had in the streetcar company, and essentially it decapitalized the streetcar company, and they went out of business in 1927. Interestingly enough, she used the money, or part of the money, to buy the old Louisiana Baptist orphanage, which is where St. Louis School is now. And she gave the old orphanage to the Christian Brothers so that the Catholics could run a high school for Catholic boys.
That is
We
really
lost the streetcar
fascinating.
system. Yeah, we lost the streetcars, but we gained
Getting to
Landry
school.
High and now St. Louis High.
All right.
Which
Well,
is
this
kind of
is
an interesting connection.
It really is an interesting connection, and thank you for giving us a history on the streetcars. I think we all wish they were still around today. But next time you're going to tell us about some other famous landmarks in the area that you might want to hop in your car and go check out for yourself. Thanks for talking to us today,
That's right.
Adley.
Thank you.
All right, we'll talk to you again next week. Stay with us. We'll be right back after the break.